I'm beginning to wonder if the thing that we call evangelicalism is just postmodern Christianity. You definitely should be skeptical of somebody on the internet claiming that evangelicalism is postmodern Christianity, because if you've ever been to the internet before, you'll have noticed that 50% of the people on the internet have no idea what the word evangelical means, and 100% of the people on the internet have no idea what the word postmodernism means. So let me be a little bit more specific. I feel like evangelicalism is just what happens when you take a photocopy of Christianity and then treat the photocopy like it's the original thing. Evangelical Christianity is kind of what you get when you have Christianity without the history of Christianity, or Christianity without the realities of Christianity. The Bible as a prop and not an actual book. Just the word Christ as opposed to the words of Christ. It's having an attraction to Christian symbols without having an interest in what those symbols symbolize. I can give you a specific example. Find yourself an ex-evangelical and ask them this question. Ask them, didn't you think it was weird that there were no Christians before the end of the 1800s who were talking about the rapture? There were Christians in the 400s and the 900s and the 1400s and the 1700s. If the rapture had been a Christian idea all that time, why didn't they have the idea? Didn't you think it was weird that there was no brother what's-his-face from Somewheresville who had written an interesting treatise on rapture theology? Didn't you find it odd that there was no Saint so-and-so who had done great work preparing his community and his church for being beamed up to Jesus in the end times? The ex-evangelical will say, well, we were never shown that. We were never presented with that. We were just shown that one sentence in 1 Thessalonians. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking what did the pastor show you. I'm asking what did you think to go seek out. Evangelical churches live in this state of the constant present. They're not even aware that the past exists. And I think that rubs off on the parishioners. They stop remembering that these things come from somewhere. And this is a different thing than having a modernized church. The Unitarian Universalists, the UCC, even the Episcopalians, they kind of act like modern churches in that they take old messages and they tell them in contemporary language and through contemporary symbols and show contemporary applications of the ancient message. But those denominations are just saying, look, the past is behind us. Evangelicalism is almost acting as if the past never happened. It took me like half an hour to come up with the words that I had in that original TikTok to try to describe the thought that I had, and then you go and describe it even better in like 40 words. This is perfect. Like, this is the best comment. You win. Like, this is the right way to describe it. Calling it an identity religion as opposed to an identity politics. This is a tidier way of expressing it, because I was sitting there in the first place trying to describe what it looks like from a non-evangelical person looking at it and trying to describe what I'm seeing. And you're describing it the other way around, kind of. Like, you're taking the viewpoint of the evangelical looking out. Like, why would they do this? Why would they adopt this type of religiosity? But yeah, this is it. That's the best way to describe it. Comments on that video were really interesting, because a lot of people got hung up on the, yeah, evangelicalism bad, which, yeah, it is, but I'm trying to get like to something like more interesting than that. Like, why is it bad, and what causes it, and where is it coming from? And there's a lot of other people who just left comments about, like, you know, the rapture is made up. And I'm like, yes, it is. Like, that's the point of the, well, not the point of the original video. The point of the original video was me trying to get into the head of the cognitive dissonance that it takes for the conservative evangelical to hold on to a rapture belief, right? Like, I'm not interested in the rapture. I'm interested in, here's this random thing, could be anything, but here's this random thing that is not biblical, but somehow or another they hold it as biblical. What is going on there, right? And this guy is getting it. Like, you're understanding the point of that video. You know that Christianity is a type of hyper reality, right? I remember reading something recently that in some survey, I think it was like the Pew Religiosity survey or something like that, a lot of evangelicals, a lot of people who call themselves evangelical, reporting that they don't go to church. And I really would not expect that a lot of them would see that as being bizarre, right? Like, it is weird to me that you call yourself a Christian, but you don't go to a Christian church and you're not a member of any Christian institution. But in their minds, like, why would I need to be? Because if you're an evangelical, you're seeing your Christianity not as a religion, not as a thing that you do in the real world, not a practice that you are engaging in or an institution you are engaging in the real world. You see your religion as like a subculture label. right? Like it's like calling yourself a Christian is like calling yourself a metalhead or something like that, right? Like it's not an institution you need to belong to. It's just an adjective that describes a vibe, basically. But yeah, you're understanding. You and I are on the same page so far. Yeah, I'm sure there's like lots of other examples you could come up with if you keep working through like this framework, because I'm not arguing, right, that the rapture is like a postmodern concept. I'm arguing that all of evangelicalism is a postmodernist endeavor, right? The point of the video is not that the rapture is something that no Christians were talking about until the middle of the 1800s. I'm just using that as like one example. The point of the video is when you point out to an evangelical, there is no Christian in the entire world that was talking about the rapture until the mid-1800s. It's not a problem for them, or it doesn't occur to them that it would be a problem. It's like in the evangelical mindset, the rapture is biblical because it feels Bible-y, right? And that's enough to make it biblical. Whereas for you and me, who are kind of working with a more modernist mindset, we'd say, well, the rapture is not biblical because it doesn't appear in the Bible. That's like our criteria. But they behave as if the criteria for whether or not it's biblical is just, does it feel like something that would be in the Bible, or does it feel Bible-ish? I know very little about prosperity gospel, but I'm sure like in order to get to prosperity gospel, there has to be some sort of postmodern mindset going on there, right? Because if we're saying like the Gospels is where Jesus is going around telling everybody to sell all their possessions, but somehow or another you've managed to read like materiality as a blessing, like that takes some sort of decontextualizing of the text. So I'm sure there is some sort of like postmodernist argument that you can, or proof of postmodernism that you can find if you analyze prosperity gospel. I don't know too much about prosperity gospel though, so I couldn't do it for you. But yeah, if you figure something out, like tag me or leave a comment or whatever, because I'd be interested to see how other people are processing this. So I didn't get into it in the original TikTok because the original TikTok was already long and kind of rambly. But I think you're going to the place that I end up going, which is if somebody has got this sort of postmodernist mindset where you're treating photocopies of Christianity as if the photocopy is the same thing as Christianity, if you've got that kind of particular strand of like postmodernist kind of thinking in your brain, you're probably going to apply it to other things, right? You're going to apply it to your politics. You're going to apply it to your decision about whether or not you're going to be a vegetarian. You're going to apply it to like how you decided what to major in college and what sort of material you want to post about on TikTok, right? You wouldn't expect people, everyone's only got one brain. So you wouldn't expect people to like have this mindset sometimes and just randomly shut it off at other times. So like I was talking about in the original video about how evangelicals don't even seem to clock that it's odd that there are no Christians that are writing about or thinking about the rapture until the end of the 1800s. Shouldn't that be evidence that the rapture is a modern creation, that it's not biblical, that it's biblical fanfic, because it hasn't been around with the religion the entire time? But you see evidence of the same behavior in MAGA conservative thinking when it comes to other things. Like, for example, I could have just as easily swapped out belief in the rapture with the conservative interpretation of the 14th Amendment and made the exact same TikTok, right? It would just be about like MAGA conservatism instead of evangelicalism, but like it's the same thought process or pattern of thought that gets you to the same place. So famously, the 14th Amendment ratified right after the end of the Civil War, and it says that anybody born on United States soil is a United States citizen. Trump right now is trying to argue, well, it shouldn't count for folks who were born to parents who were out of status in the United States. If you have undocumented parents, you're born in the United States, you no longer get to be a U.S. citizen, is what Trump is trying to say. And I saw tons of these like left-wing commentators on TikTok pulling up the text of the amendment and making the argument like, no, it says all persons. It doesn't say anything about citizens, yada, yada, yada. As if that mattered. Like all of those left-leaning people were not understanding how MAGA brain works if you pull up the actual text and you're like trying to explain to people that the text of the amendment allows for birthright citizenship, because MAGA doesn't care what the text says. the text will say whatever it is that they feel it needs to say. Like, that is the postmodernist mindset. It doesn't matter what the words are. What matters is, I need this particular meaning. I need that constitutional amendment or that Bible passage to mean a thing. So I'll just make up an explanation to justify my interpretation. So I saw these left-wing creators trying to like get into like the legalese language of like, you know, this 1868 amendment and say like, well, it doesn't say, it says all persons, it doesn't say all citizens, all this. That was the wrong way to try to convince MAGA types or people who are MAGA curious or MAGA sympathetic that birthright citizenship is there. The way that you should do it is you should just say, we have been using the 14th Amendment to mean birthright citizenship this entire time. We've literally been using it to mean birthright citizenship since there's a Supreme Court case, Wong Kim Ark versus the United States. That was like the first time the Supreme Court like affirmed it. But even when they were arguing it, debating it, writing the language in the 1860s, there's notes in the Library of Congress where people were like, wait a minute, is this going to mean that all of like the Chinese people living in California, their kids are going to be U.S. citizens? And they were like, yeah, it would. And like some senators thought that that was fine. Some of them had a problem with it. Some of them had a problem with it, but voted to ratify the amendment anyway, yada, yada, yada. But the point is that when you look at the 14th Amendment and you say, I don't think this should count for birthright citizenship, you are tipping your hand and proving to me that you live in this state of constant present, because we have been using the 14th Amendment to mean birthright citizenship for 150 something years, and all of a sudden you're saying like, no, it doesn't mean that anymore. Like, how could that be? Like, you're trying to change something, and they're arguing that like it never meant the 14th Amendment never granted birthright citizenship, but it always has been. At the same time, like, that would be the way that you would try to snap people out of it, if they could be snapped out of it or knock them out of it, is to point out this contradiction that like you're trying to argue that birthright citizenship both has been and has not been an assumption of the 14th Amendment for the last 150 years. And that's incoherent.
Yeah, you know, because people are only ever walking around with one brain in their head, you kind of expect that if somebody thinks in a certain way in one realm, they're going to continue that same framework of thinking when they get to a different one, right? And yes, absolutely, there's a lot of postmodernist philosophy built into the American right wing. Donald Trump is like our first postmodern president, and MAGA is definitely a postmodern political movement, right? One example where you can see it really clearly that I really like is this retelling of the 14th Amendment, right? So the 14th Amendment is the amendment that says anybody who was born on U.S. soil, you are officially a citizen, right? And this is the amendment that we've always used for to like give a legal basis for birthright citizenship. So when Donald Trump says executive order, birthright citizenship doesn't exist anymore, which is not how you repeal amendments. The Constitution is very clear on how amendments are repealed, and we have repealed or added every single amendment that has been repealed or added has been added in the same way, right? Which is Congress does it. Presidents can't just like decide they don't exist anymore, right? But when Donald Trump said birthright citizenship doesn't exist anymore, I saw a ton of these like well-meaning leftists and liberals here on TikTok like arguing with imaginary MAGA by pulling up copies of the 14th Amendment and like reading the language and say, look, it says all persons. It doesn't say all citizens. It says all persons. As if the MAGA gives a shit what it says. As if the MAGA gives a shit about what words mean, right? The MAGA just wants birthright citizenship to be bad because it's a symbolic and practical victory for white supremacy and makes white people feel like they're like the super mensch of America and they're the correct type of American to be. So it doesn't matter what the 14th Amendment says. The 14th Amendment no longer exists, right? And postmodernism is like this rejection of meta-narrative and this living in this mindset where like the past never existed or whatever. But anyway, so these well-meaning leftists and liberals were pulling up the text of the 14th Amendment and trying to point out like, look, this is why it's justified. It says all persons, doesn't say all citizens, yada, yada, yada. That is totally, if you were trying to like snap a MAGA guy out of it, You wouldn't do it by pulling up the amendment and reading the amendment. That's not how it works. What you would say, the way that you would try to convince a MAGA person to understand why this is a radical and unconstitutional act to try to get rid of the 14th Amendment, is you would say to them, okay, we have been using the 14th Amendment to do birthright citizenship for immigrants this entire time, right? We have, this 14th Amendment was passed right after the Civil War, and yes, it was used to give citizenship, full citizenship, to formerly enslaved people, because you just say, well, the formerly enslaved person was born on the United States, therefore they're now a United States citizen. But if it only could be applied for that, then you're saying that that amendment was null by like 1900, right? Whenever the last enslaved person died of natural causes, there'd be no reason to have that amendment anymore, right? So that would be question number one. And then question number two, you'd point out, like, we've been using the 14th Amendment to mean birthright citizenship this entire time. There was a Supreme Court case in the 1870s or 80s, the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, which was the first time the Supreme Court wrote down, like on paper, yes, this amendment is to be interpreted to mean that immigrants born in the United States are legal citizens no matter what the status of their parents were. Right? So Wong Kim Ark, like the 1880s, I think, and we have all of these Supreme Court decisions built off of that decision and citing that decision and laws that are citing that decision. So if you want to snap the MAGA out of it, you say to them, you're trying to do something new by saying birthright citizenship is not in the 14th Amendment, because we have been using birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment for 100 and whatever years. They think they're trying to, like, read, because they live in this world where the past never happened. They think they're trying to read something that was always there because it's just text. And if you want to get them to stop doing that, you force them to look at the fact that the past exists. So what I'm saying here is the postmodernist the postmodern mind lives in the constant present. It has no connection to the past. So in this one example, like in a politically postmodernist idea of like birthright citizenship somehow or another is unconstitutional, that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution is not constitutional. If they're in that mindset, you can't snap them out of it by forcing them to look at the text and understand the text of the bill or of the amendment. But you can maybe get them to snap out of it by forcing them to understand that there was a past, that these things come from someplace.